We're now on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, and the Gemara has a machlokes about whether or not you get malchus for Harisha. Ki asa Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came for Eretz to Bavel, Yachol Yilke ala Tosefes, he quotes a brisa that he heard from the scholars in Eretz Yisrael. There's a havamina that maybe for violating Tosefes, you will get malchus. And the brisa, because of this havamina of Yachol, quoted a pasuk to teach us that you're part of malchus. I don't know what the havamina was. I don't know what Tosefes means. The whole thing is very confusing. That's Rav Dimi reporting a brisa that he heard from Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Lazar Amar, Rabbi Lazar tries to interpret this brisa that was quoted by Rav Dimi. Harisha, plowing, and we're talking down during Tosefes Shvius. Hachi kama. Yachol yilkal harisha diasim mechlal upratu klal. As we had in the previous sugya, we derive the Isa Harisha from a klal pratu klal. That was on Daf Gimel Amid Aleph. V'nosavla Talmuda Liptura, and now there was a limud, a yalfusa that's quoted as a ptur, so that even though we derive the Iser of Harisha from a klal pratu klal, which would lead us to believe that you get malchus for violating Harisha, now we quote a limud to derive logically that there is no malchus. Because if you get malchus for violating Harisha, why did the Torah have to list all those different categories of malacha in Vayikra, Perek Chaf Hey, Psukim Daled and Hey? We have the Zriya and Ktsira, and we have Bitsira, and we have Zomer, Zmira, so picking grapes and so forth and so on. So all these are specified by the Torah that they're also doing Shemitah. Again, Zomer is a tolda, and also Botzer is a tolda of Kotzer. But why did the Torah need to list them all? Unless it's teaching us that these get malchus, for the exception of Harisha, which is only derived from a prat klal. So therefore, Harisha, by being omitted from the Torah, not generate malchus. And Rabbi Yochanan Omar, he offers a different interpretation of this brisa. Yomi chose Achomim Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, that we're talking about a period of time before Rosh Hashanah, during the month of Elul, which, according to Chazal, are days that are prohibited before the Shemitah year, the Torah's Tosefes. And this is what the Brisa says: Yochel Yilkal Tosefes Rosh Hashanah, the Asya Micharish Bacharish B'Katzet Tishbos. The Havamina is that if you violate Shemitah before Rosh Hashanah, during the period of Tosefes, then it's going to be derived from next limud of Becharish B'Katzet Tishbos, and you would get malchus for that. And this is a pasuk in Shmos Perek Lamed Dalet. Now, Rabbi Akiva later on in the Gemara that we're going to quote is going to derive from this pasuk the Iser of Meleches HaAvoda, Avodas HaSoda before Bita. And generally speaking, you only get malchus for a losas. And here we're talking about Becharish V'Katzir Tishbos, which is a Kiyum essay, or in the worst case scenario, an Iser essay. Do we derive a Chiyuv malchus from a violation of an essay or an Iser essay? Why does the Gemara assume, as a Dover Pasha, that you get malchus when you work the field during Tosefes Shvius, when the Torah formulates it in terms of an essay? It must be that this is an essay that's a Gili Milsa on the Losas. And once the Torah gave us the Losas, which you certainly, from which we certainly would generate malchus, then the essay is only extending the original losas, and therefore you get malchus. The Gemara is going to derive that you're part of a malchus in the case of Tosefes Shvius. That's going to be the Gzeira Shava from Shabbos. Now the Gemara says, "My Yomim Shalfnei Rosh Hashanah. What are these days of Tosefet Shvius?" Yes, now we learned in the Mishnah, in the first parak of Shvius, Ad Masechet B'Stei Ilan B'Erev Shvius, and we're talking specifically about a sada that's made of trees. And on Erev Shvius, which means we're at the end of the 6th year, at what point in time is there an Iser Harisha? As long as it's helpful for the pri to do a Harisha, that pri, which is now at this moment growing in the field, and if the plowing of the field will benefit the produce of the 6th year, then it's still permissible. And that Harisha is Mitzuraf, it belongs to the 6th year, and therefore it's mutter. So until what time is it mutter to plow? Until the Yafal Pri. As long as it's meaningful and helpful, beneficial for the Pri that's growing, that's a Pri of Shishis. Which seems to, in a sense, define the Shita of Beit Shammai as up to the point is the Harisha meaningful and beneficial for that in Shishis, that's up to Shavuos. And therefore, the Mishnah actually concludes with the words of Krovim Divrei Elu Lios Kedivrei. There's no real major difference between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. They're both saying the same thing. The deadline, shall we say, for Harisha on Shishis is the same to both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. It's really Ad HaAtzeres, up to the Atzeres. Now, the Yerushalmi, quoted by the Agos Agra, claims that Beis Shammai's deadline is a little bit slightly before, or maybe slightly after, Shavuos, out of Beis Hillel. Stay Alavan Erev Shvius. Until now, we've been discussing Stay Elon. Now we're talking about Stay Lavan. And we're talking about a field full of grains, 5 species of grains. Halecha. Until the ground moisture completely ceases. Meaning, as long as the ground is still moist from the rainy season, the plowing of the field is still beneficial for this 6 years crop. But after that time, it looks like preparing for Shvius, and that's already considered part of Tosefes Shvius, and it's off. Bechol. People are plowing in order to plant mishkos, which are squash or zucchini, or midlos, which is gourd. So up until this point, it's still mutter to plow in a field that is for grains, a steiloma. And the reason for that is because it's still beneficial for the 6 year produce. And in this case, we're talking about gourds and squash. People are still plowing to plant squash and gourds, then he's assuming that this is going for the squash and gourd crop. Rabbi Shimon Omer, the way you're formulating it, the absolute deadline when people stop plowing in order to plant squash and gourd, then you're giving yourself shiurim. Kol echad v'echad. Different people have a tendency of stopping plowing at different times. The Torah, Allah has to give an objective standard. Ela b'stei lov, not a pesach. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon insists that the latest time line for like on a grain field is Pesach time. Stay Elon ad Atzeres, as we discussed earlier. V'yomer Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Rabbi Shimon le Mishabar Kapara, Gamliel ubeis Dino nimnu al shnei prakim alolu bitlu. Rabbi Gamliel and the Bezdin of Rabbi Gamliel took a vote, nimnu v'gamru, and they issued a bittul in which they nullified those different time periods for stay Lavan and for stay Elon, naming Pesach and Shavuos. Rabbi Zeh, Rabbi Yavo, Amile Rabbi Yochanan, Gamliel based Hechi Motzim Mavatla Takont the base Shammai Basil. Shammai Basil established that the latest time, the deadline for plowing on the 6th year is Shavuos time. How could the later Bezdin of Rabbi Gamliel have the authority to undermine and to void the original takana of Beit Shammai Basil? We have a rule, Vatanan, and this is a mission in Masechet Edios, that Ein Bezdin Yochel Avatul Divrei Bezdin Chavero Elam Kein Gadol Mimenu B'Chacham Minyan. We need a later court that is greater than the earlier court in both the numbers of members of the Bezdin and in Chachma. It's not shaykh to say that Rabbi Gamliel's court could override and overturn Beis Hillel Beit Shammai because his court was greater than Beis Hillel Beit Shammai. Ishtobim kishachad. Rabbi Avo did not know how to respond. He was totally confused. Amalei, then he sort of snapped out of it. And he said, Emor kach hisnu b'nei. Maybe in the original enactment of Beis Hillel Beit Shammai, they added a clause, a condition, like we talk about Chem Devrenu Gershom, right, up to a certain point in time. And what was that condition? That color wrote, there's need to be mevatel, this chumrah, this isa, on Erev Shvius, then it's nullified, as if it never existed. And that would allow a later generation to nullify the enactment, even if they're not greater b'chachma b'minyan. Now, all this assumes that it was Beit Shammai who instituted the Isser of Tosefet Shvius on Erev Shvius. So Gemara asks, who did it? Is this a takana of Beis Hillel Beit Shammai? This is Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. That's the status of a dorais. You can't just say, well, we'll make conditions, in a bezdin, and they'll be mevatel. The Omer Avasi, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Nechunya, each pikas beischor and harchor. Eser netios arova nisachamayim halacha Moshe Messina. Three dinim are derived from halacha Moshe Messina. Arova means that we take the arova every day of Sukkot. Nisachamayim we take from the meyashiloach and we pour libations of water on Sukkot on the mizbeach. But what's most important for us is Eser Netios. Eser Netios means that you have a field that has a dense population of planted saplings. And there were 10 saplings in each Beisah. Beisah is 2,500 square amos. So you're permitted to plow until the very last stage of Shemitah, because without such plowing, the trees will perish. However, if the trees are mature ones, they're not saplings, then plowing for Shemitah is forbidden. And it's halacha Moshe Messina. Can't nullify it by a bez. Rabbi Yitzchak, ki gemiri hilchas, shloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. There are two levels of Isser. There's one, that's the 30 days before Rosh Hashanah from Rosh Hashanah. That is halacha Moshe Messina. You can't touch that. Can't tamper. However, start earlier, and now we're talking about what? Pesach time or Shavuos time. Stay Elon, right? Stay Lavan. That already is a takana Rabbi Akiva of Beit Shammai. That could be based on the condition of a rot levatel yom yevatel. That could be nullified. Also, ani tikun tzatzeres. The asnu b'ditu. They made it tonight called rot levatel yom mitzvah. So Rabbi Gamliel and his bezdin nullified the enactment of the Beit Shammai, as far as the prohibition 30 El until Shvius itself, Rosh Hashanah, that was untouchable. Or says, are you telling me that the 30-day period, starting Rosh Chodesh El, is an Isa Tosef, is derived from Allah Chamosh Mitzvah Broidin, derived from Tzukim in the Torah, the Stan, learned in the Mishnah, in Shvius, the Chorish of the Kotzit Tishbos from Kivomer, Chorish Kotzit Shal Shvius, Shekvar Nemar Sod Chalo Sidra, the Karma Chalo Tizmar. So we have a redundancy of the Torah. When the Torah says Becharish Tishbos, we already derived that from the Pasuk Chalo Tizra, the Karma Chalo Tizmar. El Chorish Shal Erev Shvius, but rather, we're deriving the Easter of the Charush on Erev Shvius, Shenichlas L'Shvius, on the top of the Daled, and the Kotzah Shel Shvius Yotzol Shvius. And we're talking about the rice, we're about Psukim. This is not Allah Moshe. Shmuel Omer, he has different pasuk, or a different shot in the pasuk, I should say. Macharish Rishus, Af Kotzer, Yotzak Omer Shei Mitzvah. Now he's excluding prohibition in the case of Tiras HaOmer. But we see from Rabbi Akiva clearly that with a derivation from Psukim for the 30 days in advance of Shmita, and therefore we have to assume that if there's Allah, we see it coming to push back and begin this Easter before the 30 days, much earlier, during the period of time for Pesach. And then once again, that's halacha Moshe Sinai. How could from Gamliel's, it's a Maisa Bezdin be marked? Okay, then this is real stuff. Thank you so much.